Hello and welcome back to Dungeon Mapster with me, Brandon. Today we'll be going over the rest of the catacombs map that we've been working on and going over some shadowing stuff. We'll focus mostly on the shadowing techniques that are built organically into Dungeon Painter Studio, which is the program we've been using. If we have time, we'll actually upload this map into Photoshop and work on some more advanced shadowing techniques for a couple of rooms where I feel like the shadows needed are a little more pronounced. If we can get through all that, we'll also go ahead and upload it onto Roll20 and work on some of the dynamic lighting that's in there. Alright, so without any further ado, let's jump right into it. So I went ahead and I actually did some work ahead of time pardon me, like I talked about last week, where I went ahead and I pre-filled most of the map. I haven't done everything yet, but I've done most of it. And as you can see, you can't really tell right now. It looks the exact same. That's because I use those really cool layers where you can turn things off and on. So we can kind of go through it together, but you don't have to wait 9 years for me to build a room, right? So we had focused primarily on setting some pillars up, especially in the entry hall. So we'll start in the entry hall. What we'll do here is go over to our noble wing and the entry hall, and you can see I have all these layers now. So the first thing I did after putting in these pillars, pardon me, was I went ahead and I put in some pedestals, and on each of these pedestals I put a little urn on top, and that'll just kind of add to the ambiance of the actual entryway. Remember, this is where all the noble family leaders are buried, right? And so just having those urns isn't quite enough space for how many bodies there could potentially be. So of course we need to, as we talked about, we're going to have some people buried in these marble shelves that we beveled off last time, right? So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and add some doors to both sides, kind of like if you think about a morgue you see on TV. They opened up and slide a body in. Similar idea, but these are going to be sealed. So if the players want to open them, they're going to have to physically break them, except for the ones on the northern end, which are probably going to be empty. When I describe this, from here it just looks like there's, 16 doors? No, 12 doors? Right? But when I describe this, if we're thinking in 3 dimensions, right? Then we'll have several layers of the doors. So I'd say this is probably floor to ceiling, and this is a very high ceilinged room, so we could probably have 4, maybe even 5 layers of doors that people could be buried within. So kind of have a little bit of flexibility with a 2D image building a 3D world. Alright, now that's not quite enough for this room, so the next thing I did is I ran a runner down the center, and we felt like the black with the purple really complemented the room. Originally I thought about doing red, but that just seemed a little too cliche, but we still have that touch of royalty with the purple, which also adds a little bit of color, because this room's kind of devoid of color. Room's still looking a little bit empty, so we went ahead and we decided on some statues to go both flanking the entrance side and the exit. We went with these suits of armor on the north end because that's going to lead us into the Hall of Dukes. And so as an honor and a thought, they went ahead and protected that side. So that's kind of what we've got in here. Notice I haven't put in any shadows yet. We'll work on that together. Right. So when we move into the Hall of Dukes up here, we had this big empty room, and we had only put in some coffins, right? Now I went ahead and added some shadowing to it to give it that 3D effect. And with these shadows, it would stand to reason that the lighting would be directly behind them. So I went and added some torches. Whenever you're doing shadows, you have to think about where your light sources are. You'd think that's a given, but you'll see a couple of places later where that's a little more difficult, and you can either be very thoughtful of the lights in this program, or you can have a little more flexibility to cast dual shadows and such in Photoshop, which we will try here a little bit later. Thank you for that. Sorry about the gurgling. Alright, so again, that's a room with some coffins. It's not very fancy. So what I went ahead and did is I added some platforms underneath. I had originally done individual platforms for each one, but logistically it didn't seem to make a lot of sense. So I ended up with these platforms, simple white marble, and the shadowing gives it, again, that three-dimensional step up effect. Right. Now, if you don't have the ability to shadow, you can always do a different color for your platform. Right. All right. Now, moving up into the Lesser Nobles wing, I haven't finished that room yet, and we'll kind of go into it together and work on it. I'm going to show you how to build what I'm planning here, and we see kind of an example of that when we go over to the Merchant wing, but we'll work on that here in a little bit. For now, we'll slide on down to the Warriors wing. And again, this is where they've buried all of the heroes of the city, because it's kind of a city state. So they've buried all the heroes there. Uh-oh, Chrono's bored. Sad. That's why he's so bored, Chrono. Oh, okay. It's just a jokester. Don't worry, we'll actually build stuff together here in a little bit. Alright, so over in the Warrior wing, we got to remember the intent of this area is kind of to enshrine and memorialize the warriors and heroes of this nation state. So we, of course, we'll start with this lower hall. And we started by putting in the pillars, right? And I've added some shadowing. Now, depending on how the lighting is going to work in this room, these shadows might not be exactly what we want. All right, we might have to go put in Photoshop shadows later, but right now we'll go with this. All right, let's hope we don't have any happy little accidents for my Bob Ross guy in there. All right, so we also added a runner through here. It's going to kind of tie it back into the entry hall, but still keep it distinct and separate by not having it run all the way through to the other runner. All right, in this room, I wanted there to be, so based on the history of the city, right, there were 9 founding warriors. In this city, they have no interference from the gods. They actually fought a war against several deities to banish them from this area and protect this city from their influence. Now, one of the key things about that later on in the storyline is that the line of nobles must be maintained for that protection. And if the nobles die off or there's a certain break in the lineage, then the deities can come back in and influence this world or this city-state, right? So those original 9 who fought the gods were memorialized here, and we've placed tombs in for them. Right, again with the shadowing. So the way these shadows are facing would assume that there are light sources here in the middle. And what that's going to be, it's actually hanging lights, chandeliers or braziers that are hanging from the ceiling. And that would give us these shadows. Now, if we wanted instead to say that the glowing portions of these pillars are providing the light, then we would have to change our light source. There would be nothing on the pillars, and instead we'd get dual cast shadows off of this tomb, but only a single cast shadow off this one. So we'd have to kind of work that in. For our purposes, it was easier just to have the light source hanging. All right, moving back up into the next room. This is where later heroes have been memorialized and enshrined. So we will go into that. I started with placing suits of armor, which are just statue elements that we can use. But with those, when again is described, the intent is that each individual that is being enshrined is buried in a coffin or tomb underneath each of these statues, and these statues are representative of them in life, potentially their armor or something, a facsimile that is similar, right? Having that, we're still a little bit empty, and so I wanted to add kind of a little different flair and flavor into it. So we just threw some book stands in the middle. Each of those little pedestals of the book could be a tome about a different battle, different war, or even a biography of some of the heroes that are buried here. Pardon me. And you can see we have those lightly shadowed just to make them pop a little bit. I'm considering putting some in between each of these, but we'll come back and see how that looks. Don't want it to be too much. Again, we're assuming this room is lit from above, right? Now this next region, we were having our warrior shrine, where they, pardon me, where they can come and pray to or pay respects to the warrior god that they follow, which is Tyre. So in here I had a lot of fun building this shrine up. Started with a simple room, obviously, and I went in and I placed an altar. This is a pre-made element that I absolutely love. I use this as often as possible because it's got some nice detail, it looks elegant, but it's very modular. You can use it for a sacrificial altar, or somewhere where a necromancer is working, a shrine to a god, or even as the base portion of a bed for a noble, or a pool that they can bathe in. A lot of different flexibility with it. So what I did is I went ahead and added some pedestals to it, upon which we can place different items, right? I decided I wanted the focal point to be this center pedestal here. So with that pedestal, I wanted there to be an artifact of the god Tyr, right? Now, kind of counterintuitive because they fought so hard to keep the gods from influencing, but they still follow some gods. And that's one of the points that's really stressed in this campaign, is this kind of weird dichotomy of not wanting direct influence of the gods, but petitioning gods to influence them. So it's something that is brought to the fore in this campaign. And so I placed a shield there, right? And that shield has the emblem of Tyr etched into it, which is it's like a warhammer with scales on top. And so I would show my yes, they are very dazed and confused. I would show my players that image on the shield, which I actually have saved on a separate area, so I can just add it or hand it out to them if we're in person, or place it as a handout on our virtual tabletop, right? And so this would give them the opportunity to kind of have that connection and try to figure out why these people worship deities but have chased them off, and that helps them get into like the history. But it's not quite done. It needs a little more in here, so I added some bowls and put flames in them. That would kind of be, you know, that fancy ever-burning fire or whatever. This room still didn't feel complete, and since I've been kind of going with this theme of statues, I added a couple of lion head busts to kind of round off this room. Again, putting the shadows. Since my main source of light is going to be these burning bowls, I cast the shadow of the altar mostly behind it, a little bit in front, but not too strong, and then some pretty heavy shadowing behind the lions. Now, originally, the shadowing extended up onto the walls, and that's just something to watch for. Easy fix is just make sure your wall layer is your top layer, and it kind of cuts everything off. Pardon me. Now, going into this area, if you remember, the way we've been talking is that these catacombs were built over time, right? So the first few rooms that we have seen, the Hall of Dukes, the entry hall and everything on the warrior hall that we've seen up till now was part of the original, along with the analogous portions of the merchant side. But as time progressed and more people wanted their ancestors to be honored by being buried in the catacombs, they started going in and adding to it, right? And that's why we're going to have this Hall of Lesser Nobles up here, which is still very well crafted, but it's definitely in a different style. We have the kind of overflow warrior area, definitely not as well crafted. There's not as much funding going into it, but it's nice. It's complete. It's got, a nice stone floor. And if you remember, we talked about the walls being different because of the different time and there being a lot less effort going into this. Remember, it's not the heroes of the realm anymore. It's just people that distinguish themselves in defense of this city, right? All right, so what we did in here, we made it pretty simple. Oh dear. We went ahead and tried to make it as simple as possible by only doing a few little embellishments in there. So in the up here, let me make sure I get the right one. I apologize. There you go. In here, I just put some coffins in. Nothing fancy, right? Now, there's not a lot in here because there haven't been many people that have distinguished themselves in battle since then. There's only been really one large conflict since the end of the battle with the deities, right? Yeah, and that's thank you, AJ Lightning. So there is always, you need to have a story behind your maps if you can. Now there are times where you just generate a map and it's just kind of fun to have, or you're just playing around, or you're like, I could use this in an encounter later. I have lots of random encounter maps that I make. But if you build the map with a story in mind, it makes it a lot more immersive for the players, and it helps you to kind of be guided in where you want to go rather than getting stuck and not knowing what to do next. So getting back to the actual story again, there's only been one massive battle since the end of the war with the deities, right? And other than that, it's been a very peaceful time for this city-state. It's been hundreds of years with only one massive battle, and the I apologize, my allergies are going nuts today. Anyway, the heroes of that battle are actually buried here, and that battle becomes a major sticking point because or major telling point of the story, because when we build the city map, there is an entire portion of the city that is in ruins and no one goes into because it is still inhabited by the undead remnants from that battle, which was 120 years ago. So that's our warrior hall mostly complete. Right, I'm going to put in some other lighting elements. Probably we'll put in some torches. In this room, I think I want to try to put the shadow of some chandeliers to kind of cast that light falling down. Haven't tried it yet, so we'll see how it works. We might have to do that in Photoshop. Alright, coming over to the merchant wing, same idea. The first 2-3 areas were developed early along with the rest of it, and then people added on. You have to keep in mind the merchant class is not as appreciated or wealthy. You would think that they are, but they're not quite as wealthy as the warriors and lauded as they were, and so it's just kind of like a step down again. So we start with this lower room here. We did something very similar to what we did in the merchant or in the warrior wing, where we go ahead and introduce first pillars. Again, I cast those shadows on them. We're going to have a highlighting source somewhere in the center of the room, and then I dropped a rug in there. Same start as the other ones. Now we're having a lot less panache and style and flair in this room. So I kind of took a cue from the entryway where they had doors that opened up and bodies could slide inside. And so I just kind of added those doors around the edges. I could come in and maybe put in some flowers or something. That's something we can consider later when we get to just embellishing everything with little tiny details, right? Now, if we move up here, this would have been the heads of the merchant guilds or leading merchant families. And again, that's going to be stacked pretty high, so we can put as many bodies as we want. If it were a newer developed city, we could say there's only one row, but it's not. So in here, I'm not going to lie, I took a cue right out of Skyrim, and my wife actually suggested this, and so I blatantly stole one of the concepts from the crypts of Skyrim, right? And instead of having coffins or normal tombs, I went ahead and put in these like shelf-like systems where they can stack in bodies. You know what I'm talking about if you've played Skyrim, where you go Dova pirating, indeed, where you go in and you're going through a catacomb and the different Draugr come to life and fight you and blah blah blah, and it's scary. There's bodies and you don't know which ones are gonna wake up, so you just slash at all of them before they wake up because you don't like real fights. Not that I ever do that. Had the same idea here, right? Little shelves, niches where we could stack bodies. Can't really tell what that is from here though. It just looks like there's some weird Tetris shapes. So to kind of embellish it, I added some bones and limbs sticking out from where the shelves would be. And I feel like that, along with the shadowing, giving that 3D effect, kind of just helps it to have a little more realism. All right. Why is that? I've turned off all of my apps that should be making noise, and yet they still are. Oh well. Hot diggity. Anyway, we'll just have to bear with that. I apologize. I'm kind of a Luddite sometimes. I don't know how to fix these things. So in here, we're going to have to put in some torches. And we'll do all this lighting stuff in a little bit. There are a couple options for lighting. We can either put in light sources here and now, or we can wait and do it all post-production in whatever virtual tabletop we're going to be using. So however we choose to do that, we can. I'm going to put them in now, like I did over in this room, and add lighting effects in post-production on whatever virtual tabletop, which in our case is Roll20. All right. So first thing we did up in here is I decided to make it another shrine. Originally it wasn't going to be so, but now I kind of decided just to mirror the merchant or the warrior side and make it into a shrine. And so again, we started with an altar. I set this altar a little bit further back. They're not completely matched up if you look across to the warriors. And again, it's little bits of taking out symmetry, of asymmetrical patterning kind of adds a little bit of realism to it. And it also was partly determined by the fact that I put a door in the side already. All right, so again, we need things on top of the shrine. Leaving it empty just kind of doesn't make sense. So I did choose to mirror the warrior one by putting on some pedestals, right? But what I did with the pedestals was a little different. I still did the flames, but on top of here, instead of having a shield with the deity's insignia on it, I put coins, right? And each one of these coins will be etched with the face of one of the deities that the merchants pray to. Again, they pray for this deity to help them have bountiful crops, help them have good shipments, help protect their shipments, but they don't necessarily want them to influence their lives in the city. It's a weird thing again. So each of these coins would have the face of one of the deities that they pray to. And if the players choose to take the coins, there will be severe repercussions, because they're altering the balance with the deities. Now, it wouldn't happen in the city unless some of the merchants found out, but if they leave the city, then they're going to be facing those repercussions, right? So it's just a little thing you can kind of play with. Now again, from here, that's the end of the original structure, and so merchants and their families over time have come in and kind of carved out another area. And this is not nearly as nice or well funded as the warrior casts area. It's definitely got more brittle stone. The walls aren't beautiful. They're kind of packed mud and stone. And so with that kind of feel in mind, I had to think about what kind of caskets the merchants would be buried in. So I went with wood, right? So we had stone that was really ornate, and then we had kind of stone and statues, and now we have wood to kind of reflect all of that. But since it's been messed around with over time, and they have a lot more people being buried in there than in the warrior or noble's wings, I was kind of able to have a little more fun with the coffins that I put in there. So I put them in like this, right? There's a few broken ones. We have them stacked and kind of strewn around. And if you look here, there's even one with a little bit of a body sticking out, because why not? The important thing about this room, though, it was hiding this entrance here. This entrance brings us into the beginnings of the hidden area, where they're going to have to try to discover the path to the enemy army that is hiding out. All right. Give me just 1 second, see if I can't kill that noise. Slack is closed. I don't know why it's making noises. Oh yeah, one of my viewers is slacking, so that's why you're hearing those noises. Thank you. Nah, Jordan. Once again, I'm going to try to close out of that. We'll probably still hear it, though, because it's obnoxious. But anyway, back to the map. So looking here, there's lots of ways you can hide a secret door. You can put statues. You can, do the classic behind a tapestry, which we're actually going to use here because cliches are fun sometimes. You can hide them behind water features. I hide a lot of things in water features on my maps, either underneath the water in a swirling vortex so they have to really look, or behind a waterfall, things of that nature. Right, but it wouldn't really make sense to have a water feature here. So what I did is I stacked coffins around the edges of the room, and I have a couple that are open, but not many. So hopefully having one or two will draw the player's attention to those open coffins, because it's different, but not so different that it's the only thing in the room that stands out. If they investigate this coffin, they're going to be able to see that there is a portion in the coffin that actually is a false back. And they can't move that coffin like they can a lot of the other ones. And so when they are able to open up the false back, they can access the next area. Right. So just to recap, we've come through the merchant's wing with our pillars and our places to bury the dead. We have the kind of shelf burial system here, and then our shrine. Followed by the just plain casket area. Right. And you can play with this. You can add some bones. We're going to add some cobwebs and stuff to it a little bit later too. So this brings us around to the we kind of call it just the tunnel, or the dirt path that we kind of made really rough hewn. This first area was done with a little more care, so it's literally carved out of the rock. the kind of next area, it looks like it was stacked stone, so maybe they carved out the whole area and just kind of stacked some stone up in these brittle walls. And then finally just some wooden or dirt packed walls in here. Um, but again, this area is kind of boring. Thinking about what it's used for, the people in the city who are very poor, they will of course want the honor of their dead being buried in the catacombs rather than just in graves in the graveyard above. But they have to sneak them in there, so a few people know about the existence of the false back here, and they're the ones that will bring bodies in and have them buried for a fee. So it's not general knowledge among the poor, it's not general knowledge among anybody in the city, there are a few select individuals. It's kind of like know a guy that knows a guy, right? But in there, we will go ahead and, just for some flavor, pile some bodies in, right? And so all these different bodies, there's a ton of different effects that you can use that are in um, Dungeon Painter Studio. And the more packs you download, the more there are. I use 3 different packs for the bodies here, and to good effect. You know, you have some different colored skeletons. Now we could have laid these out, you know, at squares, right angles, had them look nice, but since they're not being visited regularly, it would make more sense that whoever is doing this and profiting by bringing the bodies here is just going to kind of throw them in there. Now I can put in more skeletons or more bodies a little bit later if we want to kind of really emphasize how long this has been going on, but I want this to be a rather recent development. It would help explain why no one has discovered the entrance here, if it's kind of newer. And of course, we're going to have our second entrance here in the Hall of Lesser Nobles, to kind of give the players 2 chances to get into here, but also because why not, right? It could give people access to the Hall of Nobles or whatever. Really don't have a good reason for that yet in the story, but I just felt like it was better for the players to have that. Right. So that is what I did between our last session and now. That was probably about 3 hours of just building and shadowing. The shadowing is what really took the most time. Was getting all my lighting sources right and the angles right. And we've condensed that down into 30 minutes, so you shouldn't be as bored. From here on out, though, I'm boring the heck out of you guys because we're building together. Right? So where I really want to start is in the Hall of Lesser Nobles. I left that intentionally because I really wanted to have this effect going on, but a lot more elegant. So we're going to do something very similar where it has those shells, but instead of just bodies being stacked in there, they'll actually be either wooden or stone coffins that are in there. And I want these to be made out of a nice stone of some sort. So what we're going to do is we're going to do floors. You can do the rectangle. I just prefer the polygon. I feel like I have more control because I can visualize it a little bit better. And I want some kind of marble. Pardon. Now, I've used this white marble so much in here that I really don't want to do that. So really my options that I'm thinking about are black marble or this kind of tiger stripe marble. Right? We can look through some of our other options. I don't think a worked stone is going to work. Maybe the green marble. But we'll kind of see how it all turns out. What we're going to do is build it, and then we can easily just swap things out and see how they look later. So we'll start with this tiger stripe marble that I like. And now we have to think how we want this layout to be, right? We could just put columns in here all the way across, or we could do some interesting shapes. I'm a big fan of shapes. As you can tell from down here, this is not the most intuitive looking room, but I like it because it allows the players forces the players to have different kind of movement and allows for some interesting combat encounters because I can hide some enemies, or they can flank easier. Now at this point they won't be finding any enemies. very unlikely. I don't think I'm going to have them finding any enemies in the first few areas, just because it wouldn't make sense for the bad guys who are hiding in the upper section to be out and about. They might run into a patrol, depends on uh, the time they choose to go, and if they're being sneaky or not, things of that nature. So, but if I choose to use this layout in the future, then I definitely want to have that flexibility of being able to have interesting combat encounters. So a lot of my rooms are made with that in mind, right? Hello to the new viewer. How are you doing today? So what we're going to do is we're going to do some interesting layouts instead of just those boring columns. I want to make sure I have a good standoff between the wall and my first one so I can put in some statues or other embellishments, right? So I will only leave 5 feet on the top, 10 feet on the sides, bring it down. This one, I want bodies to be stacked. Bodies can be stacked going this way, so I can stack them 2 wide in a 5-foot area if I really want. And assuming each body is around 6 feet, this is going to allow us to have 2 bodies stacked here and 2 here, right? And then of course this is going to be several stacks tall, right? So you can see that I forgot to move into the right area on my stack, so I will go ahead and cut that, go back into the noble wing, lesser nobles, and I will paste it in. Right, and this is just so we can have that organization that we've talked about before, and so you can see how that benefited me earlier when I was just showing you all the layers that I built. It makes it really easy to do a shadow for that whole layer, which we'll actually do here in just a little bit. So I have this. I want to do something a little different. I only want 5 feet in between, but I'm going to do a much wider one. And we'll go about yay, bring it down. And the reason I like this polygon is because now I can kind of suck it back in, right? So we'll have this come back up through here. So now I have this shape here, which is going to give us a lot of, again, places to hide enemies or flank and such. But it leaves this big empty space, right? So either we'll put another kind of small island bank for bodies, or we can replace that with a statue, a shrine, something of that nature. For now, I'm going to leave it like that. And we're going to go ahead and mirror that, so we can actually just take this one, copy it and paste it, and drag it over. There. Do the same here, copy, paste, and drag it over. If you prefer to draw each layer individually, that's cool, or if you want to have some asymmetry, go for it. And then again, I'm going to copy and paste this. But you know those fancy dancy rich folks, they like that symmetry and whatnot. So this leaves us with this big empty space in the middle here, right? And we'll go ahead and we can go with a pillar here. We can mirror it here. Right, and we can have a nice 10-foot area here that we can put a runner down, or we can have little banisters or pillars that have items on them, or we can just leave it open. When I'm thinking about combat encounters, I like to have 5-foot wide hallways in some spots, but not everywhere, because it gets so cramped and it's just tedious and irksome for the players. So having 10-foot or 15-foot wide areas is really something you want to have as often as possible. But I have all these flanking positions where the players can come around, or the enemies can come around. It allows my players to think more tactically and gain advantage that way. All right. So with this, now we just have these shapes, right? It really doesn't help us get that effect of these being very tall marble structures that bodies are stacked in. So I'm going to start by grouping them all together. So whatever I do to one, I do to all of them. And we'll call this a stack. And I'm going to come into my effects. Now this is where it's important to think about your lighting, right? I could have lighting on the actual stacks themselves, which would make it so shadowing is a little bit challenging. Instead, when I describe this room, it's going to be a very tall room with an arched ceiling, and it's going to have big stone beams almost that support that arch, right? One might say they're girders, if Sam's watching. So again, just like some of those other rooms, I'm going to have top lighting, and that's going to make it so my shadows kind of spill evenly around each of these elements. So it'll give us an effect kind of similar to what we have here with this even lighting falling down around some of my elements. Did that here too, right? So super simple thing to do. We can go in, we go to our effects, and we can decide if we want to have like a long shadow, medium shadow, or a short shadow. Since these are really tall, I'm going to put a longer shadow on them. Possibly, that's too long. We're going to go with a medium shadow. All right, and so you can see it's kind of cast a little bit in one direction. So we can go ahead and manipulate that. I started by going to edit and copying it. When I copied it, it gave me another piece down here that I could kind of play with, right? And so when I played with it here in my edit, you can see that it immediately shifts, right? And we get that kind of even shadow all around it. So you can see if I bring it out, it's going to cast more to the right here. And if I bring the distance back some, it just brings it up to the top. It's not quite going out enough for me, so I'm going to up that blur a little bit. It's going to kind of make it spread out in all directions. You can kind of see that I'm affecting. Now what you'll see here is right here you see it changing too, right? And that's because it's an effect that I've applied to multiple areas. If I only want it to affect one area, let's turn this down so that's a realistic step here. I'm just going to copy this, close it, and down at the very bottom I now have middle shadow top copy. I'll go noble, right? I'll apply that and I'll edit it, and here I can make it so it really kind of steps out a little bit, so I get that deeper shadow effect, kind of showing us that it's a tall thing casting shadows down, right? And if I want, I could play with the angle or the distance. So the shorter my distance, the more evenly it's spread around. The higher my distance, the more it's contingent on an angle, right? So if I wanted to put the majority of my lighting on this wall, see my angle up like that. And this is okay. What I could do if I don't like that top lighting idea is I could do multiple copies of the shadow effect, select individual elements and do a shadow effect that way. Not going to worry about that. All right. So I think that kind of helps us have that 3D effect. Now, unfortunately, with this program, I can't apply multiple effects. So if I wanted to bevel it, right, and have that kind of rounded off effect, takes off my shadows. And in this instance, I feel like the shadow is more impactful, so we're going to leave those. Now you'll notice there are some places where I did choose to bevel rather than shadow, and that was here, right? The reason I did that is because the lighting wouldn't cast shadows down. This is floor to ceiling, no light above it, and nothing behind it. So the bevel was the most impactful thing I could do there. Now I always have the option to bevel it instead and do my shadowing in Photoshop, which we'll kind of look at a little bit later. All right, so we have that effect. I am not going to be putting limbs hanging out like I did in the other one because that is not becoming of a noble, right? What we are going to do is a little bit later we'll put in our torches. We'll probably put in some pedestals of busts or flowers or statues of some sort, kind of make it feel a little bit fancy. For now, we're going to finish off the base elements that we need up in the place where the enemy is actually hiding. So we already have our selected floorings put in. We remember our floor plan. Is a little something like this. So we're looking at this area from here to here, and we'll have 4 different barracks. They're going to be very similarly laid out, which will save us a little bit of time. We'll have our dining facility, which is actually really fun to play with. I'm not going to build a kitchen into it. It's more just going to be tables and seating areas. I might do like a small cauldron or something, but nothing too fancy. We could do a corner kitchen if we feel like it. And then of course the commander's chamber, war room, armory, and training area. We already have the floors for these 2. We were going to do a wood floor in the armory originally, but then we decided we were going to put a smithy in there. And so we left the floor stone, which you can see here. Alright, now remember the intent of this room. It was a large cavern that had been either dug into accidentally or carved out, and then into that large space they built structures. So you can see we have different kinds of wood that were used. In the more established areas, there's actually hand-built stone walls. So we have those around the armory, the training area, the war room, and the office. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with our barracks. Going to objects, we can make sure we're in the right layer first. We're going to start in the cavern. And you can see I already have a section for each cavern room. Alright. We want to take our wall and again put it at the very top. So that way, oh dear, got it. We don't want to do that because that's actually just the floor. If we look at it, it is just the floor. I had taken the wall out of it and just forgotten to rename it. So let's go ahead and do that. Maybe. There we go. Alright, so we'll go ahead and start working on our barracks. So things we want in our barracks, obviously sleeping arrangements, place to store things, and then we can move on from there. I like to include rec areas if possible, so maybe a card table or something like that. So we'll start very simply, and we'll look for bed. Not bet, bed. Alright, so we have things as simple as bedrolls. We have some very fancy looking beds as well. I want something simple. I could even do a cot if we so chose, but I really don't like the look of this one. It's a little too cartoony for this build, right? Apparently I can't type today. Alright, but some beds I do like are this one here. I'm a huge fan of that bed, very simple. Looks like rough spun on for the blanket. Or you can always add these bedrolls or sheets over the top to kind of give it whatever look you want. So we have a lot of different color options, but we're going to go super simple because if you remember from our story before, this area is inhabited by an enemy occupying force who has been slowly sneaking into the city via overland and shipborne travel, and this is kind of their staging area, or one of several staging areas, and so they're not going to have anything too fancy. So we'll start with this bed here, and keeping in mind that each square is 5 feet, it can help us know if we need to resize, right? So this bed is about 7 feet long right now, and we can tell if we just take off our stick to grid and line it up with the edge of the grid there, we're looking at a good 7 feet. That seems reasonable-ish. I am going to scale it down just a smidge, maybe down to 95%. And I feel like that's a little more realistic, right? So we'll stick that to the grid again. Now, how do we want these beds laid out? Okay. Well, we're thinking about having an open area in the center, possibly for a rec area. And so we can start by just placing some beds in. Now, if you've ever been in actual military barracks, if it's a bay barracks, you'll see that the beds are actually alternating head to foot. So if I did a bed here, then you would take the next bed and you'd flip it, right? The realistic reason why that's done is because you don't want to have head-to-head people coughing on each other and potentially spreading disease. And especially in an environment like this, that would make a lot of sense to me. So I'm going to be alternating the beds head to foot, so that we can kind of have that effect, right? Now, you don't have to do that, because if you want to have like a foot locker at the head or foot of each one, that's an option for you. I'm going to have them stacked off to the side. Their little foot lockers or chests, right? So, and we'll go ahead and switch this, have a modicum of symmetry. Now this wall is going to kind of affect how these beds are laid in, right? We're not going to be able to get as many, and that's okay because they're working with what they've got. So we'll do that there. Another bed here, and then I'll alternate the last one to be right here. All right. So this did limit the number of beds we got, but that's, again, that's okay, just going with the story and who we're working with, right? Those beds don't stand out too much. We might change the color of the floor a little bit later to help them pop just a little bit. This floor is pretty busy, right? But we're going to go ahead and get things built in first. So I didn't leave a rec area in here. That's because while we were talking, I decided this room will actually be the kind of the rec area in its entirety. There will just be a little bit of stuff, some storage, things of that nature. Now in describing this is a small area for an occupying force. So those beds would be bunk beds. They might be up to 3 tall, really tall bunk beds, or we'll have some hammocks or something as well, right? Because we're not going to be able to get a ton of people into this area. That would make sense because we don't want to have too many people drawing attention to an area, and you definitely want, if one cell is found, not all of the enemy to be lost, right? So it'll be a decent force. On a more practical aspect, I don't want my players to be completely overwhelmed by 400 enemies. At least not like this. I'm not going to be activating the minion rule in here. So we'll start again by placing some beds and alternating them. And if you're less spatially challenged than I am, you could probably just do all the beds that are stacking one way and then flip and go back. But it's not the way my brain works. So you can see here, we run into a bit of an issue with this wall. 2 options. I can either leave the bed as is and just place it there. I can move the wall, or I can take off my stick to grid and kind of just move it up a little bit. So I guess that's 3 options, not 2. And that's what we're going to go with. This is not a professionally trained, very fancy army. They're just kind of throwing up what they can have. So they get to work with it. So I'll go a bed there and a bed here. And then we're going to place a couple here. Now again, I'm trying to set up each room a little bit differently, and that would be beneficial to us for a couple of reasons. One, it keeps players from getting bored, and 2, because it wouldn't make sense for every room to be strictly regimented in the exact same with this invading force. If it were a very structured invading force, it would make perfect sense, but these guys are kind of hooligans and brigands. So my bad. All right, so we'll head over to our final barracks room before we get to kind of that rec area. And again, looking at the contours of this room, I have a little more flexibility here, I feel like. So we will really pack this one in, just because I want to. and flip that there, right? All right, so I'd love to put a bed here, but that wall really doesn't allow for it. I could move the wall or tuck this in, but instead I'm going to leave room for a chest. Right. And we'll place a bed here and a bed here. Now the intent of doing all this is kind of make sure I do pack in as many sleeping accommodations as possible to kind of make up for there not being a lot in other places. All right, so what we're gonna do now, I think that's plenty. I mean, we have beds for 2, 4, 6, 8, 16, 18. So beds for 25 troops. We could put more in if we wanted, but that's a small platoon, right? So if each of these cells consists of a small platoon, and we know this city-state has not been in a lot of conflict, it would stand to reason that it's not super well defended. And so several platoons might be able to wreak havoc if they do like surgical strikes, which is the intent of this force. They're meant to go in and wipe out the warriors and the people they've been hired to kill. They're very specific targets. And once they do that, then there are other groups outside the city that will move in. So we don't want huge groups. Right? So let's go ahead and put in our chests or footlockers. Again, there's a lot of cartoony options. This is a little too ornate. Big fan of this one. Or this one. They're both kind of simple. Alright, you can always do this, but this again a little more cartoony than what we're going for on this build. So I think we will stick with this one here. And this is a little bit wider than what I want. So we're going to scale it down to about 75%. We'll lock the scale. Alright, and when I'm using the stick to grid, it's not lining up quite the way I want. It's not perfectly centered. Part of that is that I scaled it down. So I'm just going to take off stick to grid and I'm going to kind of eyeball them. Now, a cool thing about this one is it changes colors. So it kind of gives it a little more of the variety and takes away that monotony and looking like we did the same thing throughout. So we'll do there. Now, if you've been paying attention, you'll notice that I've broken one of my rules and I have not been separating items and stacking them in their layers, right? I've just been building everything right into the cavern. My bad. So we'll go ahead and we'll fix that real quick. So I have object bed. You can see as I kind of hover over each one, it selects it over here so I can see which ones I'm looking at. It doesn't always place them in order on the stack here, in the order you built them in, which is why you can't just find one and then hold shift and select the bottom one. You have to go individually and look. So if we remember, I labeled this one Barracks 4. So we'll take that group, we'll call it Beds 4, and we'll cut it. We'll go into the barracks, into we don't have them separated. Good job. But that's okay. We'll just paste it in here and we'll work on stuff later. Alright. So going back to our caverns, we'll just quickly go ahead and group the other things. So if you want a bathroom break, because I know you're all very riveted by this, now would be a great time for that. There we go. So it's a good example of what I was talking about when I said it doesn't always stack them in the order where you place them. So I was having trouble finding that bed. It's all the way down here. So we'll add that group. And that's also probably where my other bed went that I wasn't able to find a minute ago. Again, we'll cut those, go into our barracks, and we'll paste them. Alright. So back here we have all these chests now. We know we've only placed chests in one room, so that'll make this pretty simple. To select all my chests, group them as chests 4. And once again, I'll cut it. I will go into barracks and I will paste. Alright, so we can get back to it now. So if I want to continue to add, I need to make sure my objects are selected, keep my chests, and zoom in just a little bit. So there are several of these objects that will alternate colors as you go, and make it so there's a little more variety. AJ, that's a really good question. AJ asked, for the story purposes, what is the military group trying to attempt? So I kind of alluded to that a little bit earlier. At the end of the day, this organization has been put together. They're mercenaries from around this world, and their goal is to destabilize. It's threefold. It's one, to destabilize the security forces of the city. 2, they are trying to actually cause discord and havoc to allow another entity to kind of take over. And 3, they have been hired specifically to eliminate both the warriors and certain nobles. Now, if you remember what I was talking about earlier, the existence of the nobles is necessary to protect this land, or the city-state, from deities, right? Well, there are a small group of individuals, a trio of them actually, who long ago attacked the city. You'll remember I talked about how the city's actually split, and part of it has been ruined. Well, they originally tried to attack with some kind of necromantic powers and undead forces, and were repelled partially by this protection from deities. And so they have schemed for the last 150 years to get their vengeance, to be able to take the city. Part of it is hiring these forces to wipe out the nobles and allow their deity influence. Now it goes a lot deeper, because they're actually, those 3 people are actually building a god, and so once they have completed the creation of this new god, they will be able to wield its power to take out the city and take over. And so as long as the nobles are still in existence, this can't happen. So it's complex. Actually, one of the main stories, or one of the main characters in this storyline, is a young woman who was born of a lesser noble and a merchant, and her parents were both activists for equal rights, for treating the lower classes better, for the nobles actually doing stuff, because the nobles have grown pretty corrupt. And they were both assassinated, and all the fingers point toward the nobles. And so with the invasion of these guys, and some influence from the trio who actually had the parents assassinated, they're going to try to one, destabilize everything, and two, that young woman is actually the one that's being turned into a god, but she doesn't know it. She has these fits where she kind of blacks out and doesn't remember a day or two, and during those times are when this trio is actually grafting demigod spirits to her. One of the main player characters, I'm actually playing it even though I'm DMing, is a fallen angel that has lost his memory, and that's because his actual essence has been ripped out, and they're grafting it onto this girl um, as part of their attempts to make her into a deity. And so, as the storyline progresses, she's going to show more and more deadly magic abilities, which would kind of indicate her growth as a deity. Um, but they need, getting back to your original question, they need to destabilize the nobles enough to the point where that protection fails, and they can use this girl that they've created to overthrow the city and rule. So, a lot going on in it, and there's a lot more to it. It's actually a pretty fun campaign. I spent an entire drive from Boise to Seattle thinking about it and planning it. So we're going to go ahead and hit this dining facility now. We'll make sure we're in the right area. Go back. And we have our dining facility. Just for ease, I'm going to go ahead and group those walls, get them out of my way. Wow. Wolfsla. There we go. All right, so we're going to start by putting in some tables. Then we'll top the tables with some foods and such. We have a lot of table options. Some of them, if you look in some of the packs, will actually come with stuff already on them. I personally like to build my tables and then manually put things on them. I have a little more control, but if I'm in a rush, I'll use some pre-built tables. Let's see, give me something a little realistic there. I want to bring the scale back up to 100%. And I think it would be realistic to have a table here, 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 and here. And I can actually, these aren't ones that I can stack very well, unfortunately. There are some tables that you can stack a little bit better than others to kind of bring it so it can extend down farther. I'm not really going to do that here. What I am going to do is, we talked about maybe having a little kitchen area. We can go ahead and do that. If people come and eat in shifts, that might make sense. So let's remove that, bump that over, and make this a kitchen zone. So to work with that, I'm going to go ahead and have maybe a serving table. And that is definitely bigger than I want. So we'll scale that down. Perfect. And then we can go ahead and flip it here. And I'll make this my cook space, right? So I'll down here put a fire and everything, maybe a cauldron, right? And then we can have these tables. We're actually going to flip them now that we've changed kind of the orientation of the room. All right. So we'll be able to get a little more table space in here. These ones will butt up. Now I like this kind of layout because it allows the players kind of have, it's not a straight shot getting through, which is a little more fun, in my opinion. This will also allow us a good deal of seating. Not a bad layout. Right, I could instead shove some tables up against walls and corners, but I feel like this makes the flow a little bit more intriguing. So I have dining tables. All right, let's go ahead and put some stuff on the dining tables. So if we go into my folders here, FA has a really good pack for this. Table clutter. All right, it has all sorts of individual things. Some of them you can get little stacks of things. So we have mugs, plates, things like that. I have food. Now, if you want some stuff that's put together a little bit like more, there's lots of things, you don't have to place things individually. You can just jump on down to my favorite pack, Todd's Complete Fantasy, and they have a under their objects, they have tabletop stuff. Somewhere. There we go. Furniture tables. And so on their tables, say this is not the right one. Bear with me. There we go. Under furniture kitchen, they have some food prep stuff. They have some pre-done things. If you don't want to search individually for stuff, you can just type in table, and it will have some tabletop stuff that you can put down, food, things like that. You can type food, and you'll see some that are already laid out again. So if you're in a hurry, these ones are really nice to be able to use. All right. I am not in a huge rush, and so I'm going to maybe use this one for my food prep area, but for my other ones I'm going to place by hand. And so do that there. Make sure I bring that to the top so we can see it. Alright, and going back into my FA pack for tabletop stuff, it'll have a lot of the mugs, plates, things of that nature that I want. So I'm going to hand place some of these plates, right? I want a metal charger that I'm just going to place in the middle of each table. This might be where they can place dishes when they're done, or maybe something will get brought there. I might put some candles on it or something. But just a little bit of something to make it look a little different. And then we'll go ahead and get some wooden dishes. And we'll place them in here. And doesn't look like it's going to work too well with these metal plates, so I'll actually get rid of those. They aren't as important to me as the actual dining areas. The plates themselves are. So we get that. And there. Alright, let's grab some utensils and put them down next, because cutlery, right? Very pretty stuff. Good to have. And I'm actually going to only haphazardly throw a couple on here. Give it a custom angle to kind of and there are individual forks and stuff that you can get, but I'm not that worried about those details right here. So we'll kind of put it like that. I want room for some cups and pitchers. So on each table, I'm going to have a pitcher. Now this is definitely not what you would see in a normal, at least a modern military dining facility. You have to go get your stuff and carry it yourself. But here, the kitchen staff are going to be a little bit, nicer. And we'll have some mugs for the water, just a couple. And an empty one. Alright, so I have a couple options. I can either build something similar on these other tables. I can kind of copy them and just paste it. I think I'm going to do a little bit of both though. So let's group that. Let's go table clutter. 1. And just for ease, I'm going to copy and paste it. But I'm going to flip it vertically and horizontally. So I just kind of get a little bit of a different look, right? Not super different. If you look, it's obviously going to be the same, but I don't want too much repeat, so I'm only going to do that once. The other two I'm going to do is individual tables. So we can go ahead and maybe grab a couple mugs. Start with wooden bowls this time. And I only want to do a few. Maybe there. Throw on some little cups of water. Maybe an empty one. And for this one, I want to put some food on the table. So, say maybe a steak here. Some salad got spilled, because, you know, they would definitely be eating salads. Let's put a couple sausages on this table. And I don't love the angle. These guys got a little sloppy over here. Definitely want a slice of bread just kind of sitting around. I'm going to leave that space open for now. Coming back down to kitchen. Give me a dagger too. Perfect. Alright, bringing it back down to our kitchen area. We'll kind of put some stuff in here. So what kind of stuff do you guys want to see in the training area? I'm thinking training mats, maybe some weights and weapons racks. What else would you guys like to see in there? Got a couple pictures in here. Food searching. Well, apparently no one wants to see anything in there, so we'll just kind of go with what I want. Alright, give me the Fantasy Fortress, and we'll go on table stuff. And nope, not loving it. So we're going to kind of leave it like that. We're going to throw some benches in. Alright, we can do simple stone benches. We're probably going to go with bench B here. It's rough, a little bit of a back. Not quite as cartoony as some of these other ones. A lot of my builds do use these slightly more cartoony elements. I find it entertaining, and they look decent. But I'm trying to kind of stay away from that here. You can see some of the stuff on the tables is a little more cartoony, but can't be helped right now. Alright, so we'll throw a couple benches in here. Make sure we have it at the right angle. That looks a little bit bigger than I want, but it's going to work out well, actually. Dial it down to about a 90, and I'm going to stick them under the tables. So it's going to be right up against it. And let's go 180. But when I actually put the layering on, these are going to end up being under the tables, which will be a decent effect, I hope. Alright, so we'll stack those 4. And we'll call this bench 1. And now I'm going to drop this to be underneath my tables. And you can see now they are, in fact, underneath the dining tables. They kind of disappear. Gives us a pretty solid effect. So I'm going to copy and paste it. and then we'll click and drag. And we'll do it again. And one more time. Now with one of these, I kind of want to do it a little different, right? So we'll probably actually come into this one and go into it. I'm going to take one of the benches and I'm going to kind of just turn it a little bit. So we go up to my rotation tool and let's give it a slight rotation, as if someone had kind of gotten up and just moved the bench a little bit. All right, and we're going to do it to this one too. So we've selected it to know which one to get into, and we'll rotate that one a little bit too. Alright, so that just gives it a little bit of variety. I think it is helping things look good, so we'll probably do one or two on this table as well. I want to leave one table completely normal because that will just add to that realism a little bit, unless I'm going to do every single bench being turned, and I'm really not that interested in that. So we're actually going to go this way, and we're going to pull it out just a hair. And I will also do this one. And that one we're just going to pull straight back and then turn probably in the same direction as the other one. You know, everything seems to be turned that way. So instead we'll turn this way. There we go. So we have a little bit of variety now, right? So we've got the tables, the dining area itself done. We just need to get the kitchen spot done. So going back to DFAC. This is definitely not looking that pretty. So I'll have to clean all this up a little bit later. Not too worried about it right now. What we will do is we'll put in the little kitchen area. So let's start with a fire. All right. And I have some pretty good fires here that I can use. I oftentimes will make my own kind of wood here and stack it underneath. Not going to worry about that today. We're going to use one of these fires right here. I'm going to make it just a hair bigger. And I'm going to put a cauldron on top. Alright, so we have a lot of different cauldron options. In caves or in camps, I like to use this style, but here today, we're just going to go with a simple cooking pot and place it right there. Alright, so we have a cauldron. We can go ahead and put in a couple more sections up on top of that. So let's just go kitchen. And we'll do one of these. Alright, and so our dining area is done. So we're just about out of time. So what we'll just kind of go through a review of what we've done. We have taken this from an empty map to having floors and then walls. And then we started building embellishments. We have put in some flow for our players for potential combat. And we've put in a lot of little details. We worked a lot on shadowing to make things have that three-dimensional pop. Without that shadow, as we saw here, and as we can see in here, everything just kind of falls flat. If I want to actually bring those things out, let's kind of look at these beds real quick. Beds in 3. By adding a little bit of a shadow, right, it can make it look a lot more realistic, and that's way too big. So we're gonna do the shadow here, and it kind of makes them pop. All right, so if we clear it, you can see it just looks a little flat, and that kind of makes it pop a little bit. So the shadows really help, right? After we kind of worked on those shadows, we finished putting in some bodies and worked on embellishments in the place where the enemies are going to be, right? Next time, I'll show you guys the finished product. We may or may not upload onto Roll20 and do the dynamic lighting. If you guys want to see that, let me know. If you don't, we'll move on and start our first city map, right? And that's actually going to be for Port Rodiger, where this actually takes place, right? I've been saying Port. I'm getting some of my cities mixed up. This is for a place called Port Rodiger. And so we'll actually start building Port Rodiger itself next time we see you guys. So if you have any questions, concerns, qualms, quandaries, or complaints, go ahead and jam those into the comments here, whether you're on, or if you're on YouTube. If you're watching it live on Twitch today, go ahead and check this out on our YouTube channel. Also, if you enjoy these maps and you want to see them in action, the Office of Student Better in Life has 2 campaigns, D&D campaigns going on this quarter. One on Wednesday nights at 7 Pacific time, and one on Thursday nights, also at 7 Pacific time. The quest right now is the quest to save Christmas, so come check us out. It's a lot of fun. You can catch us live on Twitch, or of course we post everything here on YouTube. Pardon me. Now with that, I'd like to give a special thanks out to Dungeon Painter Studio for creating such a good program and working on some updates that should be coming out soon. Special thanks to the community content creators, especially Forgotten Adventures creators Strixon, the ATE Packs Ridiculous Name, Topps Complete Fantasy TPD83 is the creator of our different stair packs that we use, and of course Brad, who makes Complete Fantasy. Music we use today is royalty-free playlist by I Need Sleep on Spotify. I just want to say thank you to all of them. And again, if you enjoyed this video, please give us a like. It helps us a lot. And yeah, let me know what you guys want to see next time. With that, happy adventures, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Take care.